Old Dominick Distillery is a family-owned craft distillery located in the heart of downtown Memphis, Tennessee. The distillery offers a range of spirits, including vodka, gin, and bourbon, in addition to their newly released Tennessee whiskey and bottled in bond Tennessee whiskey. Old Dominick's flagship Tennessee whiskey is a unique blend of corn, rye, and malted barley, aged in the heart of downtown Memphis, where the hot and humid summers and cool winters work their magic on the barrels over time. Old Dominick Tennessee whiskeys are available now in Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, and Mississippi, with additional state distribution coming later this year. To learn more about Old Dominick, visit their website at olddominick.com to find out where it's available near you, or check out their online retailers to have it delivered straight to your door. There's a new award-winning 4-grain straight bourbon whiskey that's been taking the market by storm, Penelope Bourbon. Bottled in historic Bardstown, Kentucky, Penelope's balanced yet flavorful taste profile comes from a unique blend of 3 bourbon mash bills. Currently available in multiple expressions, Penelope is remarkably smooth and flavorful. So whether you're sipping neat or using it in your favorite cocktail, Penelope is the perfect choice for you. Penelope's full lineup is available in select markets as well as online. Visit penelopebourbon.com to learn more and to find a store near you.
With Liquor Barn, you can shop your favorite bourbon, that perfect bottle of wine, or discover something new. To place an order for pickup or delivery, download the Liquor Barn app, visit liquorbarn.com, or call your nearest Liquor Barn location. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list for all the latest news on products, promotions, and events. Liquor Barn, where Kentuckians go to celebrate life. Cheers!
Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight here live in the Bourbon Life Studios, otherwise is what Matt calls my basement, it is my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing, man?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing really well, and it is your basement that we are in, the Bourbon Life Studios. But how are you this evening for us?
I'm doing great. Hey, look, here's the thing, Matt. We've done this show. We're in our 4th year. We've done 165 shows. Oh, wow. And, I try to be really cool. We've had an opportunity to interview a lot of great guests, and we've had a lot of great people on the show. But, man, I am beyond excited about tonight. So I can't wait to get into this. But I'm really just kind of nervous, Matt. I'm excited too.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great one.
Yeah, it definitely will. I do need to tell everybody we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Old Dominick Distillery. We appreciate their support. We appreciate the support of all of our sponsors. And with that said, Matt, why don't we just go ahead and jump in if you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Absolutely. Our guest hardly needs any introduction, but joining us for this episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast is the VIP visitor lead at Buffalo Trace Distillery, Mr. Freddie Johnson. Freddie, welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
I don't know about the Mr. and all those other things, but I am Freddie, and thank you very much for that. Pretty cool, Matt.
Well, we're thrilled to have you on the show, Fred. And I'm sorry that it's taken us this long to connect with you. We had Harlan on the show in season 2, and this is one that I've wanted to do, and we tried a couple, I think last year, and didn't get it worked out. But I'm really excited that we've got you on here, Freddie, and just thrilled to get to spend some time with you. Even though it's remote, it's still great. And I've had the honor to get to meet you a couple of times in person as well. So it's great. You're loved by so many people, and this is just going to be such a fun show. But before we jump into the conversation, we're going to talk about what we have poured up on this first round. And we've got, and this is Freddie's picks. So we're gonna be going with what Freddie wanted to drink tonight. So the first one we have poured up is the standard Buffalo Trace Bourbon. And standard, I mean, that's just it is the Buffalo Trace Bourbon from Buffalo Trace Distillery. And Freddie, if you want to, I mean, I can let you talk about it if you'd like to share information about what it is that we're drinking.
Sure. So Everybody's familiar with the Buffalo, and they're familiar with Buffalo Trace. But the significance of it, Buffalo Trace was a new recipe, a new mash bill that they kicked off. They put it together in 1992 and reached its maturity for its taste profile that they wanted to go with. And it was released in the latter part of 1999, beginning of 2000. So that's when Buffalo Trace hit the market. It's a traditional bourbon, but what's cool about it is most people don't realize it has already taken double gold multiple times at different international spirits tastings, and it's what we call a good flagship bourbon, but it's also an extremely balanced bourbon because it comes from the middle floors. And there is an art, there's a craft to doing that, because when you start playing around with the middle floors, you can do a couple of things. One is if you leave it up in that environment too long, it'll cook it. And that heat will become part of the taste profile of the product. And no matter what you do to it, you can't get rid of it. It just continues to, that heat just continues to develop even after you swallow. It just doesn't go away. But the first thing to notice about it is the nose. And the way being on the middle floors, the way it gets enhanced just by those cycles of warming up and cooling down, not too hot, still enough of a temperature fluctuation that it moves the whiskey in and out of the wood. And so you get a nice soft nose. There's enough robustness there that it makes you want to come back and revisit it again. Now, here's a fun fact as we go through this tasting. Now, everybody knows I do this fun thing with the White Dog, the Everclear, Georgia Moon, White Lightning. And if you've seen the documentary Neat, you see me do that on there. So I want to get you into Buffalo Trace by telling you what happened. So I had a group that just recently came through, and we were up by the still. It was the mash bill one coming off the still, White Dog coming off the still. And this guy said something to me, and he said, "Well, what about that White Dog thing?" He said, "I saw you do it on the Neat, and we tried to do it with the Buffalo Trace, and it didn't work." And I said, "Well, it won't work because the whiskey's been in the barrel." I said, "It's been cut." I said, "A number of things has happened to it after it came off the still." And he said, well, we were just, and it was kind of like he was saying it in such a way that we think this is kind of like a bunch of smoke. And I said, okay. I said, well, you have to understand, I said, on the legal side, I am from Buffalo Trace Distillery with my grandfather and my dad. I said, but on the other side of my family, very few people realize I'm from the mountains of Kentucky. I said, it's called Bloody Breath in Jackson, Kentucky. My grandfather mined his own coal, and his buddies ran moonshine stills out of his coal mine. And I said, so the first time I got to see this going on was with the moonshiners checking their whiskey and comparing it to someone else's to see if it was any good. And I said, so those characteristics and those things will only surface after the whiskey comes off the still before it encounters anything else. So he said, all right. So I said, all right, so let's just go through it. So we were joking about it. One of our tour guides had come up with this thing. I said, all right, so you're going to cup your hand just like you're buying some moonshine from me out in the woods. I said, you're going to cup your hand. And I said, then you can nose it, and you'll notice it's soft and buttery to the nose. It does not smell anything at all like Buffalo Trace. And I said, and then you can take a little sip of it. And I said, it'll be sweet. I said, you'll pick up on a little bit of corn. I said, but then what you're going to do is, I said, after you nose it and you take a little sip, I said, then you're going to smack your hands real hard, rub them real briskly, and smell them again. And so they start getting excited. I said, now, we need to set the stage. I said, what we realized, one of our tour guides saw me do this, and we noticed something. What we noticed was a lot of times when you pour this White Dog into your hands, the first thing that people start to do is they start to brag about their amount of consumption and how they can handle it and all this. And I said, and this guy said, he said, well, the reality is when you pour it in your hands, that is your reality factor that tells you how well you can really hold your liquor. So if it's running all through your hands, you're not holding your liquor very well at all. But then he got a chance. So what they did was they went through the process of smacking their hands and noticing the alcohol volatiles. When they first come off, it's extremely strong because you rupture the water membrane that allows those alcohol molecules to escape, which is the same thing. Let me back up here. I get pumped up sometimes, Mark. The point I'm making
That's fine. No.
The point is people don't really realize why they're swirling the whiskey around in the glass. So the swirling the whiskey around in that Glencairn glass is comparable to pouring the whiskey in your hands, smacking your hands and rubbing them real briskly. Is what you're doing is you're basically allowing the alcohol volatiles to escape. You're increasing the surface area inside that Glencairn glass. So those volatiles, those vapors are going to come up through that chimney, which makes it easier for you to smell what's going on with that whiskey. So people see us do it, but they don't really understand why they do it. So that's the first piece of this. The second piece of this is what happens as you go through these different layers, the alcohol comes off first, then you can get the dominant grain that the whiskey is made from, and then you get the type of yeast that was used. So, and then you get a chance to see the proof of the whiskey off the still by the way your hands feel. So that viscosity is what separates bourbon from whiskeys, vodkas, and gins. As you well know, there are oils and fatty acids associated with corn and grains. So by bringing it off the still at a lower proof, you retain some of those natural properties of those grains. That becomes part of the taste profile of the product. So it helps you to understand why you can make legs with a good bourbon, but why vodka tends to slide right back down the side of the glass is because it's coming off the still basically as a pure grain alcohol. Now, the cool part is what happens next, and you've seen the professionals do this. We've done this. You take that glass, you swirl it around, and what do? We hold it up to the light. We look at how it coats the glass. We look to see how long does it take for the legs to form. Well, that breaking gives you an indication of the viscosity. So the thicker the coating, the richer the mouthfeel is going to be. The longer it takes for it to break, the longer it will linger on your palate. First thing. And then you nose it, right? So what do? You've seen them, like the real professionals, they... Now, think about this one. As many times as you've seen someone do this, and as many times as you've done it, how many times has anyone ever explained to you why you do it that way? They never do.
Very seldom. Yep.
So the human body is amazing. It's something that the body does to protect itself. It's been doing this since we were first born. Without us even controlling it, it's a cycle. It happens roughly every 2 to maybe 3 hours. What your body will do is it will change the dominant nasal passage you breathe from. You don't even control it. Okay. So that's why when you're nosing, you swirl that glass around and you go one side and then you do the other side. And if you do that right now with this Buffalo Trace, just basically pull the glass away for a bit and just take a couple of breaths and then do one side of your nose and do the other side. And what you will notice is you can smell Buffalo Trace on both sides, but I be dipped. I can smell it better on one side than I can on the other. And if you come back in a couple hours and do that, and you come back in a couple hours and do that, it will have reversed. And the other nose will be the dominant one. So that's why you do one side and then do the other side, is because you don't really know which nostril is the dominant nostril. And the reason that you don't want to just go full nose straight in real fast is because the alcohol volatiles go up both sides, and it will cause you to miss some of the subtle nuances that dispersion allows the air to bring out subtle nuances for you. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But that's why you nose. So right now, as we start this, my right nose is the dominant one. And I can pick up things on the right side that I don't even detect them on the other side of my nose.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Matt, what about you, man? That's very cool.
That's super cool. You know, I actually did know that. I'd forgotten that I knew that. But I knew that your body does that every few hours.
Yep.
I didn't know that it changed. Oh, go ahead, Freddie.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
I was going to say, people always said, not always, but, people have suggested sniffing out of both sides. And I just thought, well, maybe because one side stopped up or one side, there may be something going on, but I didn't know that your body actually changed the dominant side. That's an interesting fact to know. So,
and it's really it's really mind blowing in the environment that we live in today, with COVID and all of the flus and all the other things that go on. So certainly your respiratory health is significant in which nostril it's going to be, because if you're plugged up with allergies on one side, it's not going to work. Okay. But that's when you can open up your mouth, and they'll tell you to take a little bit of air in through your mouth, and then that will help you to pick up on other subtleties that you might have missed, which is the other piece of this, is you open up your mouth a bit when you do that. Just so many crazy things. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Matt, what do you pick up in terms of the nosing on the Buffalo Trace?
To me, I pick up a nice nose of certainly corn, then like a sweetness, a candy corn almost, a little bit of honey, a little bit of straw as well on the nose. And then I pick up some cherry and like a little bit of cola as well, kind of come across for me when I'm nosing it.
Yeah, the cherry comes through. I get that. It's almost like a ripe fruit profile, like kind of going back and forth between maybe even like red apple and sweet cherry. And I get like a vanilla brown sugar aroma as well. Some of the spice comes through. Now this is mash bill number 1, so we don't know what the actual percentages are, but this is the one I believe Freddie's is. This is the higher. It's a little bit higher rye content than mash bill 2. Is that correct?
No. So mash bill 2 is mash bill 2 is the higher. I was at
okay. I got them backwards.
Matt, what I was trying to do was I paused there for a moment to say, well, how do I delicately correct Mark that said, no, that's not right.
You don't have to be delicate with it. Just go whole hog.
Just tell me I'm wrong.
Cutting him down.
So mash bill 2 is the higher rye. That's the Elmer T. Lee and the Blantons and all of those.
Right.
I did a fun little off-premise tasting with some folks. It's just a group of folks getting together. We were just having some fun. And I was playing around with some of these sensory kits. And it is so amazing that when you do something like this, and you just put out 3 or 4 of these different spices and different ingredients, and you say, okay, we're not going to tell you what you should smell or taste, but knows your product, and then take a little sip of it. I also tell them to hold water. If you've ever seen part of what I do with this water thing, it's the term for it is called acclimation. And some people will tell you, take a little sip and then come back and revisit and take another little sip, and you play around with it. But do you have some water? I noticed that Matt has some water there with him. You got some water nearby?
Mm-hmm.
Now watch this.
I've got it.
So watch how this works. So you just had a sip of the Buffalo Trace, and you picked up on a few things.
Yep.
Now, let's try this again. Take a sip of water, hold the water in your mouth, and with the water in your mouth, revisit that Buffalo Trace with the water in your mouth, and watch how some of those brown sugar notes and some of the other things will now come to the forefront. And they're not overwhelming because they're not being dominated by the heat or the alcohol.
Yep. Yeah, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. And you get that, it's almost like a creamy mouth feeling as well that you don't, I don't get that when I drink it neat. But when I add that water, it's almost like it combines to make a creaminess on the palate there, Freddie. So And you're right, the brown sugar comes out. I get a little more of the oak that comes through as well.
Yep.
When I do that. But yeah, that's a really unique experience to do that.
Yeah. And the heat from being on the middle floors is not that heat on the middle floor. It basically enhances the punch of the rye, which is what some people expect. They expect that robustness with a good bourbon on the front end. But what's interesting is something like at the single barrel selection event, if you notice, it was a tremendous mix of both men and women at that event.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also a tremendous difference in ages, from some newbies coming in to some folks that have been around for a long time. That's what started me playing around with this water thing. Is I was doing an event, and this lady, she really enjoyed wine, but she had attended the event with her significant other, and she made this face. She took a swig. She was drinking some bourbon neat, and she took a big swig like she would sip for her wine, and she just made this face. And everybody at her table kind of chuckled and laughed at her. And it I don't know. And maybe I'm just getting to be an old fart now, but you become more aware of why you bring your bourbon out. And just as an aside on this, as we taste these things, they're Freddie's 3 unspoken rules. And I think I touched on them at the event. The first unspoken rule that I've noticed is you never, ever bring out your good stuff with people you don't like. It just doesn't happen. You can have it right down there in the cabinet, right next to where you're standing behind your bar. And if it's not somebody that you don't want to waste a pour on, you will act surprised. You'll say, well, I've heard a lot about that one. And you will never mention that you got it right there in your own cabinet. It just doesn't happen. So you never bring out your good stuff with people you don't like. And the second rule is, if you do like them enough to bring it out, you always have to tell the story about how you got that special bottle. It's a story. It's like a good bottle of wine. There's always a story that goes with the bottle. And for some reason, we have to tell that story every time we give somebody a pour. And that brings you to the third piece. And that's where I'm taking you now. Is the third piece is, if I do like you enough to bring out a good bottle and I share that story, it means that I want it to be enjoyed. We're not in a hurry to go do something else. You never bring them out when you're in a hurry. So when I bring the bottle out, my objective is to have them appreciate the pour as much as the bottle means to me. And that's when that liquid becomes value added. It's a conduit for you to let them know I'm sharing a part of me with you that I consider very special. So when that lady made this face, it was like, okay, she is not having a good moment right now. All right. This is just overwhelming her. And so that's what I learned from my dad. I said, well, listen, I said, try taking a sip of water, hold the water in your mouth, and then take another sip of that pour with the water in your mouth, and just roll it around on your tongue for a little bit, and then take gentle swallows and see if it's better for you. And all we really did was we just cut it. Like, it's like in the lab, everything is tasted at 40 proof. So we cut it and got her past the heat of the alcohol, which brought the alcohol concentration back down to something that she would normally encounter with a wine. And then she picked up on the brown sugar. She picked up on the oaky notes and things like that, because the alcohol wasn't the dominant factor striking her palate. So it's a fun thing, and we'll play with this as we go through this. But what I tell folks is, some people will tell you, well, if you're not familiar with the pour, or if it seems a little harsh, add a little bit of water to it. Just do a few drops of water. Well, a few drops is different with each person. And what happens is, if I've got a real expensive pour, especially of an older bourbon, but Julian Van Winkle will tell you, take an eyedropper and just do a drop or two into like your Pappy 20, and you realize it opens up other notes. Well, if I'm a newbie and I don't know any better and I pour water into it because it's already slammed my palate, I'm trying to compensate for what it just did to me on that first round. So I over pour. And when I do that, I've ruined that drink. I can never get back to the original pour when I do that. But what I can do is hold different amounts of water in my mouth. And that's where I get them to appreciate one person's neat is another person's flick of water, which is another person's splash of water, which may be your bourbon on the rocks. You just have to cool it down and dilute it a bit. And then you appreciate the same flavors that this person is picking up on neat, but they become acclimated to it. And they will never, it's just amazing, Mark, they will never forget that you took the time to help them to appreciate this pour that you considered so special. And it's an easy thing to do because you're going to be there for 2 or 3 hours. You're in there for the evening. So why rush go quietly into the night. Don't rush into it. Anyway. So you get,
that's a great point.
Yeah. So you just got me started on that. It was just something that I think about, and you can appreciate it even with Buffalo Trace with that heat. That heat is, we're at 90 proof. And we're talking about, 7 to 9 years, averaging about 8 years in the barrel, middle floors of the warehouse, where you have heat fluctuations. So we're going to play around with different levels in the warehouse with these other two and a different recipe. But we're going to see that the most heat that we will experience, we just did with this one at 90 proof.
Okay, great. Well, I tell you what, Freddie, we're close to the end of round one. So Matt, let's talk real quick about the palate and the finish on this one, what you pick up, and we can share that, and then we'll close it out and come back for round two.
Sounds great. So on the Buffalo Trace, I pick up the notes of that candy corn, or kind of like a sweet confectioner's sugar, a little bit right on the front. Then it leads to some grain. I get a fair amount of corn, a little bit of cereal grain with it as well. And then some of that, some of the oak makes its presence shown. You can tell that it's got some age with it as well. Then a nice heat, nice cinnamon, and a good vanilla kind of long lingering finish comes with it as well.
Yeah, I like that spice that hits right on the front of my tongue. And then you get that combination of sweet with it. Matt, you're talking about the corn, it kind of reminds me, I don't want to say corn flakes, but like Frosted Flakes a little bit, maybe a little bit of corn, maybe that sweetness that comes through. So when I was a kid, eating those Frosted Flakes, you get that sweetness and that little corn profile, but there's also a cinnamon touch to it. So it's almost like a cinnamon frosted flake maybe that I'm thinking about, but it's a very nice profile, very 90 proof, very easy to drink, and very enjoyable. So Freddie, how do we do on the palate and the finish on that?
Excellent. Harlan really talks about this one. He considers it a well-balanced bourbon because it did just what you'd indicated, Mark. Very pronounced on the front end. You get the robustness. Midway to your palate, you can experience the transition. And then that finish, like Matt was talking about, was it's soft on the finish, but there's still enough there that you appreciate some of the softer, spicier notes that tend to round out as you swallow. That's pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Freddie. And tell you what, let's take a quick break. We'll get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more with Freddie Johnson from Buffalo Trace Distillery in just a minute.
Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The Three Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they call Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.threechordbourbon.com.
From our good friends at The Stave comes Lexington's newest hot spot to meet up with friends, have fun, and eat some great food. District 7 Social is a social and beer hall, but it's a lot more than that. Located in Lexington's Distillery District, it's the home of Lexington's first duck pin bowling lanes, and it also features a self-serve beer wall. That's right, self-serve. And if you want more, they've got it. You can try one of their delicious cocktails from the bar or order some great German fusion food from their on-site eatery, Germanish. So what are you waiting for? Be seen, be social. District 7 Social. All right, everybody, welcome back for round 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight here live in the Bourbon Life Studios, it's my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing out there, man?
Hey, Mark, I am doing great. How are you doing in there?
I'm doing really good. Having a great time tonight, man. This is a lot of fun. So great stories, great information, great pours. So I'm excited. And I do have to say we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Old Dominick Distillery. We appreciate their support. We appreciate all of our sponsors. But Matt, with that said, let's just jump into the show. Tell everybody who we have with us again tonight, please.
Absolutely. Your guest this evening, this afternoon, this morning, whenever you're listening to the podcast, is the VP Visitor Lead at Buffalo Trace Distillery, Freddie Johnson. And Freddie, we know you're excited to be back. So please tell us what we've got poured up here and what we're doing for round 2.
So round 2 is we're taking Buffalo Trace to the next level. So bottled in bond means that we put some stipulations on that bourbon. To be a bottled in bond, there you go. You got it. To be a bottled in bond, got to be at least 4 years old, not just 4 years old. It's got to be at least 4 years old. It can be older. Okay, there you go. And a couple of interesting things. So E.H. Taylor came up with this concept to create a standard for bourbon. So it's got to be 4 years old. It has to be made, processed, distilled at the same site during the same season. And there are 2 seasons associated with making good bourbon or whiskey. Usually it's the fall and the spring. Summer months tend to be a little bit warm. So we take the month of July, and Harlan uses that to do program maintenance on the equipment just because it's the hot part of summer. The cool part about it is it has to be 100 proof, as you well know. So our E.H. Taylor small batch is 6 years old, but it is the same recipe as the Buffalo Trace. So I have a little bit of fun with this sometimes. I'll tell folks to take their Buffalo Trace glass and then take their E.H. Taylor glass and nose them, and you notice subtle differences between them, even though it's the same recipe. Now, as you do this, even though we've gone from 90 proof to 100 proof, that's why this progression of what we're doing is kind of important to me. Is I'm going to show you how just because you go up in proof doesn't mean that it's going to slam you because you're going higher with your alcohol concentrations. Part of that is determined by where the barrel's set in the warehouse. So I get softer notes. I get fruity notes. So let's see what's going on here at 6 years old, mid to lower floors in the warehouse.
Great. Matt, what do you pick up in terms of the nose on this one?
I agree with Freddie that this has some fruitier notes. I get more red apple, more orchard fruit on the nose with this one. I think actually for me, a little bit more rye comes through. A little bit more of the bready rye grain spice on it as well. There's a good amount of kind of like a toasty marshmallow or like a nice nougaty soft sweetness in it as well to accompany the oak and vanilla.
Yep.
Freddie was giving thumbs up on that.
It's, I think Matt, you touched upon part of it. A lot of folks feel intimidated when you're doing a tasting and they talk about, we're going to do a tasting, we're going to do a blind tasting. And they feel like, oh my Lord, I don't know all these different products that are out there. And I don't want to look, like a dum-dum and all this kind of stuff. And then you hear someone give a description just like what Matt did. And the beauty of what I appreciate about what Matt just did was it makes me feel good about being a part of this industry when someone is familiar with products, but they present them in a way that I can relate to what you are nosing or what you're tasting. And when you said red apples, I mean, red apples is right there. And that's why I said, that's what's cool about doing things like this is it's great to have all these have all this other verbiage in the background. But if you're wanting me to appreciate this product, don't complicate what my senses are experiencing with trying to relate that to something that I'm not familiar with. So I have no earthly idea of what this bourbon would taste like at 30,000 feet in the Alps. I have no, I can't relate to that. But I can relate to a juicy red apple because we've all had apples either at our family's home, our grandmother's house. They always had that bowl of apples. And those ripe red apples, when you walk into that kitchen, you can smell them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a beautiful description. Beautiful.
Yeah, Matt's really good about those descriptors. There's no question about it. But now, Freddie, so you said of course, we are talking about the same mash bill, but the E.H. Taylor barrels, you're saying they come from a lower floor. Is that right?
Mid to lower floors. And
okay.
it's all 6 years old. We talk about it. It's 6 years old, but it's 100 proof. But that helps you to understand when you take that sip of it. The first thing that I notice about it is it sits lightly on my palate. It dances across my palate. It does not weigh it down at all. So I can get those fruity flavors, those candied notes, but they are not heavy. It's light and refreshing. Yeah. And even after I swallow, the mouthfeel that I have, that viscosity is not near what it was with the Buffalo Trace.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So Freddie, you've been with Buffalo Trace now for what, about 20 years? Is that right?
A little over 20 years. I was only going to stay for one.
And
that's a true story.
So can you? Is it really?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. Okay. Do you care to share that with us?
I only came back to Buffalo Trace because I had made a promise to my father that I would try to work at Buffalo Trace Distillery with him during his lifetime. He thought it was so important that he personally could tell people that our family had 3 generations to work at Buffalo Trace Distillery. And I came back before I was planning to come back because my dad had become terminally ill. And he had promised Mark Brown and the marketing director and Amy and all of them that he would try to live long enough to roll out the 6 millionth barrel because he had rolled out all the other millionth barrels. So he was determined to live long enough to do that, but he also knew he was terminally ill. So he had figured if he could get me back here while he was still healthy, he could point out the things about the distillery that had been handed down to him by his father, things that he had learned with Elmer and Leonard Riddle and Ronnie Edens and all those old guys. So he was getting me back so he could pass off the baton, but do it in such a manner that it wasn't just rushed. And that's why he had always tell me, look beyond the obvious when you walk around the distillery. So I just call it promises made, promises kept. And we can move on, but that's why I came back and I got hooked up with Mark Brown and them, and the distillery was in its infancy as Buffalo Trace. And if you think back, Mark, over 20 years, it is amazing the transformation that Buffalo Trace has gone through from its inception with a new recipe to becoming the most award-winning distillery in the world in a 10-year period. So that's what captures me is, I'm going to try to roll out a couple more of these barrels. The good news is they plan to hit 1 million barrels every 3 years. So I might make it. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah. So that's how I came back I call it promises made, promises kept. I kept a promise to my dad. And of all the things I've ever given my father as gifts, keeping a promise to my dad meant more to him than anything else I've ever done. And I don't regret it at all.
Well, that's great. So you came back for 1 year and here you are almost 20 years later.
Yeah. And all the things, all the things that have happened on the way. I wish that he could have been here with me when I received the when I was inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. I think that that would have made him a real proud papa. I just think it would have. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. And congratulations on that. That was in 2018, I believe. Is that right? I think
somewhere.
That's when it was.
It's kind of like being married for a long time. Sometimes it don't matter anymore. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, but the cool thing about it is, Freddie, I mean, you grew up around Buffalo Trace. You saw it go through a lot of changes. I mean, you got to see part of the boom, before the market kind of fell apart. You got to witness, and you weren't working there, but through your father, I mean, you got to see Elmer develop Blanton's single barrel. You got to see the resurrection of the bourbon industry. And now you're seeing this. I mean, it's kind of like the golden age of bourbon right now, as much as it's continuing to grow. I mean, you've really had a unique opportunity, in your position and just through your family history to see and experience a lot of this. I mean, can you kind of talk a little bit about that, what that means and what you've seen in the industry as a whole?
Yeah, that, a couple of things. One is inclusion, as I mentioned before. But it's not just inclusion of men and women. I did a tour, Mark. It was 4 generations, and the grandfather was the one who set up the tour. 4 generations: the great-grandfather, the grandfather, the father, and the son. He had just turned 21. I guess you might as well throw in and the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. You might as well make it spiritual here. But
right.
But the point was 4 generations with their significant others, and they all enjoyed bourbon, and they all came to Buffalo Trace. So that to me is the evolution that I think no one anticipated. I just did this thing with Mark Brown. It was on CBS. And Mark Brown even admitted that when they produced the forecast that we are enjoying those products today, you have to think some of those numbers went back 20 years for some of these products. So they were forecasting 10 and 20 years prior to today what the demand for our product that we have today, what it would be. And obviously it was nothing like what the demand is right now. And so that was
Right.
part of the aha moment is no one would have ever imagined anything like this. And I certainly would not have imagined the ethnic diversity that has come into this environment that we're in today. And it's not just here in the United States. If you think about it, bourbon has gone global. And, bourbon is eroding into Scotch markets right now. Who could have ever forecasted that 20 years ago when we were just busy thinking about making hooch for the United States? So that to me that's the exciting part of this. Where is it going from here? I don't know. I know that I'm not ready. I don't think I'm really ready for instant bourbon, which is what they're cranking out now, that freeze-dried bourbon. I think I'm not quite ready for that yet, but oh God. Anyway, that's another story. We can do that on the wrap up, but let's continue on this journey. Matt, what else you want to talk about here?
Oh gosh, we're having such a good time. So what do you contribute all the success at Buffalo Trace? Because you said in the matter of maybe 10 years, you became the most awarded distillery in the world.
Yep.
What do you think helped to drive that?
You have to go back to the original marketing plan. They made a marketing decision when they first rolled out Buffalo Trace in 1999, beginning of 2000s. And the thought was this: we're not going to advertise. So play this one back, Mark, and think about this one. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to do like in days of old, which is what E.H. Taylor did. We're going to go on premise, just in Kentucky, and we're going to do free pours at restaurants, bars, taverns, anywhere they let us do pour. we're going to do 3 pours of Buffalo Trace and let people taste it. The business model was simply this. If people do not like this new product in Kentucky, all the marketing money in the world and all the hype will not improve its taste. So it started in Kentucky and it took off from there. And it started to get recognition. Word of mouth started to kick in. I try to recognize people that had a significant impact on my life, but also the company. And I'll give you an example of this to show you something that people love. Eagle Rare. It's not one of our products we're tasting this evening, but Eagle Rare. Everybody talks about Eagle Rare and how it used to be Eagle Rare 10-year-old 101. Then it went to Eagle Rare small batch 90 proof. And how could they do that? And when it became Eagle Rare 90 proof, 10 years old, small batch, it became the first 10-year-old bourbon to have ever won double gold 5 consecutive years in a row. And they were like, oh, well, how did that happen? Well, let me show you something. So if you happen to have, I know you have some bottles around there. I want you to pick up a bottle of Eagle Rare and flip it around and look at the back label, bottom right-hand corner. So if you got a bottle of Eagle Rare around there somewhere, just flip it around.
It's I know there's one somewhere. I don't have one right here with me though, Freddie.
Don't worry about it.
I can grab one during the break.
So Eagle Rare, bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see a name down the right-hand corner, Joe C. On any bottle of Eagle Rare that you pick up, you will see Joe C. So it starts in Kentucky, and Joe C. was associated with Benny's up in Chicago. And he says, give me some of that Buffalo Trace, and I'll take it up here, and we'll do some of these pours, and let's see if people like it up here. And from there, it explodes and goes all out to the central area and all the way out to the West Coast. And as a way of saying thank you, Mark Brown and them got together, and as a way of saying thank you to him, every bottle of Eagle Rare carries Joe C.'s name in the bottom right-hand corner. So when you ask about why does Freddie stay around and what caused Buffalo Trace to do what it's doing, it's because of things like that. It's things that you should do versus things that you could do. So the could do's is they could have let Joe do that and it could have exploded and they could have taken all the recognition and it would have been all Buffalo Trace. And no one would have ever been the wiser. But that would have been the could. The should is, what does it hurt to tell someone that this is a person that did something that was so significant that we should say thank you. We should recognize this person. And so those are the coulds and shoulds. And so when you ask me about what do I think has caused Buffalo Trace to be where it is today, I think it's because they went beyond the coulds and they did the shoulds. And that's the reason why the tours are complimentary. That's why the tastings are complimentary. That's why when some of the things come up like George T. Stagg, think about this. A year or two ago, we didn't release George T. Stagg. We could have, but the taste profile was not right. So rather than release something that was just so that we could say we released it, they said, we're not going to release it. And they've only done that. They've only not released twice. If you think about this, a few years back, we did not release the Van Winkle Rye 13-year-old.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They could have, but it's not the right thing to do. The should have is leave the barrels alone, let them let them reach their proper taste profile. So even though it means missing a window or an opportunity, in the long run, your integrity is not breached because you rolled something out that was inferior to what you consider yourself to be a benchmark for. Coulds and shoulds.
Yep. No, that's a great question, Matt and Freddie, an even greater answer. I really appreciate that insight into how things operate and what the mindset is at Buffalo Trace. I mean, that says a lot about the people there. It says a lot about Harlan. It says a lot about management, ownership, everything. So that's really, really impressive. Matt, let's jump back over to the C.H. Taylor small batch. 100 proof. Let's get some final thoughts in terms of palate and finish before we take a break and end up in round 2 here. So what do you get in terms of the palate and the finish on this one, Matt?
Sure deal. The palate on this one, right on the front of the tongue and right on the front of the palate, is very crisp. It's like a nice bright crispness right on the tongue. Then I pick up like some apricot or some sort of like a zesty stone fruit, cinnamon, nice oak, and then kind of peppery on the finish with a little bit of heat that comes with the finish, but doesn't burn you up, certainly.
Yeah, I agree. All great notes on that, Matt. I would agree. The cinnamon, the hit on the front of the tongue. I don't get the same necessarily like I did on the Buffalo Trace. There are, subtle differences there. There are similarities though. I think that cinnamon comes through, that sweetness comes through. It's not that corn flake or frosted flake like I talked about. It's just the corn doesn't really come through on this one to me as much. I don't get the grain like I did, but that cinnamon really comes through. There is a sweetness to it. That red apple, Matt, on the nose, and I think it still comes through a little bit to me on the palate. It was funny because I took a swig, and it reminded me of being a kid, and my granny used to make grape Kool-Aid for us. And I swear, I got a hint, a taste of Granny's grape Kool-Aid for just a moment. So that was I don't know where it came from, but that was really, really a cool experience right there.
I think, Mark, just real quick, I think that what you just shared is part of this experience. I think relating to something that we experienced that is a pleasant moment, whether it's something coming from the oven, walking into a room that it's a family moment, or it's some friends getting together that you've not seen in a long time, and maybe there's something cooking or something that, they just fired up the grill and they've got the hickory going or the charcoal, you know what I mean? And those things will help you identify and appreciate products because they're pleasant emotional connections. But yeah, certainly that description of when you put what Matt had talked about with what you just described, my grandmother, Mama Lou, used to make these apple cobblers, and she would use these fresh, red, delicious apples, and she would always make those dough strips across the top and put cinnamon and sugar. And when she opened it up, you had those soft caramel notes, and from the sugar, you had that cinnamon, and you had those fresh apple aromas, and just they hit you. And it's just, and yeah, so in your description of V.H. Taylor, I had never really thought about profiling it that way. But my goodness gracious, everything you described is freshly baked apple cobbler pie from my grandmother. Just crazy.
That's awesome.
Just crazy. So the bready stuff that you were talking about earlier, you get those with that. You can smell that fresh bread smell where they make those strips, and that cobbler bubbles up between those strips. That's just amazing. That's amazing. Wow. And I also like what you talked about, Matt. I like the fact that it's there, but it's not heavy. It's not dominant. It's sitting very light as it's still lingering. I still get the cinnamon, and I get some of these other things. And I pull out things as you talk about this. I just pull out some stuff from my kit, and I'm like, do I get that, or do I get something that reminds me of something else? And you're spot on, man. That's pretty cool.
Matt is expert level at this. He's my color commentary guy, so he does a great job at it.
I do what I can.
Well, I tell you what, we're at the end of round 2, so let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more with Freddie Johnson from Buffalo Trace Distillery in just a minute.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me here still in the Bourbon Life Studios, otherwise known as my basement, it's my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing, man?
Hey, Mark, I am still doing great. How about yourself?
Great. You know what? I'm 2 pours in on some of my favorite products, man. So, and we got a great guest. So I don't think I could be doing much. If I was doing any better, I'd be guilty.
Oh.
So, Matt, with that, I do have to say we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Old Dominick Distillery. We thank them for their support and their sponsorship. And we also thank all of our other sponsors as well. Matt, with that said, you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Definitely. He's the VIP visitor lead at Buffalo Trace Distillery, Freddie Johnson. Freddie, welcome back for the final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Well, I'm going to call you two guys my M&M buddies. So, Mark and Matt, this has been an enjoyable evening. Totally had some fun with this one, and that kind of leads us into this next one. And when I was doing these, I was talking to Matt Higgins about Mark saying, which ones did you want to try to do this podcast with? And I like doing things like this for a couple of reasons. So we are, what we're actually doing is we're going up in proof. But the age is pretty much the same for all three of these products. That's the cool part about what we're doing. And this Weller Antique lends itself nicely because we're going from 90 proof to 100 proof 6-year-old to the Weller Antique 107, which is also in that same age bracket. And the cool part about the Antique 107 is this: if I was doing a pecking order of expressions, I'm going to show you where I'm taking you. So we would start with Weller Special Reserve, 7 years old. Then we would go to Weller Antique 107, which is also 7 years old. So it falls within this same age bracket as the Buffalo Trace, which runs in that same age category, as well as the E.H. Taylor. So now we can say, okay, the two defining factors are going to be the recipe and where the barrel sat. Okay. So when I do my Antique 107, if I did the spectrum of the wheated recipe, it would start with Weller Special Reserve, then it would go to Weller Antique 107, then it would go to Weller Full Proof, then it would go to Old Rip Van Winkle 10 years old, then it would go to Weller 12, Lot B, then we would transition either to Pappy 15 or William LaRue Weller, and then we would go Pappy 20, then Pappy 23, and ultimately, if you could find it, Pappy 25. Yeah. But the cool part about it is the antique there. Oh man, you just started me on a journey here just with this little bit. So think about this. If you could do a tasting, and you want to show someone the beauty of age and time in a barrel, you could do the Weller Antique 107, which is the one we're going to taste now. You could do Weller Antique 107. So what's the next proof at 107 in a wheated product from our distillery? What is it? It's Old Rip Van Winkle, 10 years old.
Old Rip, 10-year-old. Yeah.
All right. And then think about this. What's the next time you see 107 proof? It's Pappy 15.
Is that on the 15?
15-year-old. Yep.
It's 107 proof. So just with 4 pours, I can take you from the baby which is special reserve, 90 proof, to 107. And I can link you in on 107 with 4 pours. And you appreciate time in a barrel and placement within the warehouse. Just with those 4 pours. And if you could get the White Dog, you could taste it as an infant, because we produce the wheated recipe in a White Dog. And you could do the White Dog, Weller Special Reserve, 107, Old Rip, and Pappy 15. And just those, you can spend an afternoon or an evening, and the nose will blow you away, as well as the taste on the palate. Just with those. Anyway, those are the kind of, so when you ask me, what do I do? As you are experiencing, you get a lot of different folks with your podcast. And you have a lot of different products. But what I try to get people to do is, if you want me to appreciate this journey that you have me on, let me start with the baby when it was born. And let me take my palate on this journey through your expressions. And I can make an intelligent decision based on my palate, which of those expressions do I enjoy the most? And that's when proof and price and age and small batch versus single barrel, that's when all those things come into play. But it's not until I take that journey can I appreciate one that you're trying to get me to say, this is the best one. So I just tell people,
yeah,
it's crazy. All right, anyway, whole nother story, but
no, that's a great thing, and that's really cool, because I've not really thought about that before, and I am fortunate enough to have those bottles. I don't have the 25, obviously, but I do have the 15-year-old, and I've got the 107, obviously antique, and I do have the Old Rip. So that's something that might be a good episode by itself, Freddie, just to do those. I don't have the White Dog. But yeah, that would be a lot of fun just to trace it, because you're talking about the same mash bill. But now are the barrels, are they generally located in the same place in the warehouse, or are they in different locations depending on which expression?
Yeah, a little bit of a different location. So,
okay.
The north side tends to be the side where the humidity level is higher. And so you don't get a lot of gradient heat. So cooler temperatures, higher moisture level tends to slow the evaporation rate down a little bit through that white oak barrel. But it produces softer notes, because usually if you're going to do a Weller barrel, the only one that we've ever done that produced a lot of heat was the CYPB, Craft Your Perfect Bourbon, which was a wheater that was the recommendation was put it on the top floor for 8 years. And if you get a chance to taste CYPB, the first thing that anyone will tell you is it's hot. You can pick up on that heat. And to me, that's not something I look forward to in a good wheated bourbon. I look for the softer. Let's just do this. Let's go on this journey. Okay. Let's go on this journey.
Let's do it. Yeah. We've got the 107 poured up here. So go ahead, Freddie.
Oh my. So when you start playing around with your nose and you're doing this one, I'll tell you something amazing is during the course of us doing this, I've changed from my right nostril to my left nostril. Somewhere in the course of this time, I'm picking up more on the left side than I am on the right now. So that just kind of like,
that's funny, because I've done the exact I've done the exact opposite. I've gone from left dominant, and now my right nostril is actually more dominant on this pour. So I've never realized that before.
So we're not crazy. So it's not until you and so normally if you're in a conversation just chit chatting back and forth, you're talking, you're going back and forth, and you're not really paying attention to the message that your own senses are sending you. And so that's just, to me, I picked up on that and I was like, I'd be dipped Here we go. So that's the first thing. The other thing that I noticed that I can, through your nose, you can detect a higher concentration of alcohol. When you swirl it around and do that, you pick up on, it's not harsh, but you can pick up on basically if it's a sense is just tingling more, or that uses an indication. Heat is entirely different from alcohol. Because you get fruity notes with this. I'm getting a lot of cool fruity notes with this. Very soft, but they're more like caramelized notes is what I'm picking up on right now. So let's go on this journey. And the first thing you're going to notice is, remember, the higher the proof, the lower the entry level, and the lower the proof off of the still will enhance your mouthfeel. So if you hold a sip of water in your mouth with this one and take a swig of this antique, you're going to pick up on it warming up a little bit. And the next thing you will notice is the viscosity is going to change. You're going to feel it going buttery and creamy and rich in your mouth. The viscosity actually gets enhanced.
Yeah, that is such a unique experience to do that, because that's something that I just don't do. You know, I've dripped water into it, a couple of drops of water into a neat just to open it up a little bit, but never put the water in and then take a sip. But you're right, it really does bring out, you know, the viscosity, the mouthfeel, the creaminess of that. I don't pick it up when I'm drinking it neat, but when you combine it with that water, it's a totally different experience.
Yep. And that richness that you pick up on is the beauty of bringing your wheated bourbons off the still at a lower proof. You retain more of the natural properties of the grain, and wheat doesn't have a lot of oil in it anyway. So when you do this, the corn, more of the richness of the corn, which is where that buttery kind of a mouthfeel is going to come from, it's there. But corn is more of the sweetener, and the wheat is going to soften it up. But then it's going to allow you to pick up on a little bit of the toastiness. I was just playing around with this, and I was like, what else am I picking up on? And it's like you almost have to get past the richness, the creamy texture that leaves you, to start really picking up on things like, I don't know whether I'd call them candied cherries. I don't know where in the hell that came from.
No, that makes sense. I can see it. Matt, what do you think in terms, let's just talk about it all in terms of nose, palate, what you get in terms of effects, since we've been sipping on it a little bit. What do you get in terms of that nose and then palate as well?
The nose on this one, right away, I get, Freddie, what you were talking about with that cherry note. I get a sweetness, a sweet cherry, almost like a sweet cherry taffy with it. Then also on the nose, I pick up some red wine fruits, like some dark berries. That cherry comes through again, maybe a little like blackberry or a little
blackberries.
Yeah, like just a dark wine fruit as well. Then there's the oak and the vanilla, but there's also a lot of like bread crust that I pick up from the wheat. It's got like a toasty, bread crusty type aroma. And I think most of this really comes through on the palate as well. There's the cherries right up front. It leads into that sweetness, kind of that taffy that I was talking about. Good amount of like a nougat on it. The wheat is there as well. A little honey, like honeyed toast or honey wheat bread. Just a really, really well done product. One of the favorites of most people that I talk to when they talk about wheated bourbons.
Yeah, Matt, I agree with that. You know, I'm going to jump in here and just, you know, since I talked about my Granny McCarty, I got to talk about my Mamaw Rucker as well. So she used to make preserves, strawberry preserves, blackberry preserves. And this reminds me, with the wheat and the blackberry, Matt, this reminds me of a piece of toasted wheat bread with my Mamaw's blackberry preserves spread over it because I get all that sweetness. I get that wheat, that bready aroma, but I also get that blackberry that comes through as well. So
Yeah.
that's my final answer. That's what I'm sticking with.
and I that when I was doing the like dark dried cherries, that's almost like a blackberry when you when you do that.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're right on. It's got a lot of like very kind of cobbler-esque flavor and aroma to it, kind of like that baked pie crust, kind of that buttery doughiness, and like the blackberries or some sort of a berry cobbler with it is what I pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at 107, again, it's, for somebody that's new to bourbon or just kind of getting used to it, you think 80 proofers, 86, whatever, 90 proof maybe. But even this one at 107, just because of the mouthfeel, the creaminess, the smoothness of it, the softness, not smooth, but soft. I think this is something that somebody could actually enjoy and even maybe a couple of drops of water, maybe a little ice or something that would just take a little bit of the edge off, but there's not really that much of an edge to it, even though it's 107 proof.
That was when you'd asked the question about position of barrels in the warehouse. That's part of that. So the further down in the warehouse I go, the cooler it's going to get, the more the aging is influenced by the barometric pressure rather than temperature fluctuations. Remember, the ambient temperature of the earth is constant at about 51 to 52 degrees. So when I drop those barrels down to the lower levels, and I've got either thick walls or I've got an insulation barrier of walls around the outside, and these barrels are sitting in the core part of my warehouse, they're not influenced by temperature fluctuations. They're more influenced by the weather. And so you get, it's like marinating a piece of meat. You get a softer relationship of the spirit to the wood, which, oh man, shoot, don't start me on this journey. But you hear about tannins all the time. I mean, you guys get bombarded with, the tannins, the tannins, the tannins. You got to go back and look at history. And tannin in early European days merely meant the relationship of the spirit to the wood. And it didn't matter whether it was a wine, a brandy, a cognac, a bourbon, or whiskey. If that barrel with that spirit inside had a harsh relationship with the environment on the outside of that barrel, that spirit will pick it up. It will become part of the taste profile of that product. It doesn't matter what kind of product it is. If it was aged in a harsh, hot environment, it will be in that liquid. There's no way to avoid it. If it sits there for an extended period of time. So that's why positioning, you'd ask about positioning in a warehouse, it is critical to what you want that product to be when it grows up.
So talking along those lines, I've been reading a bunch of books lately about bourbon and bourbon history, bourbon production, etc. And one of the books, I can't remember who had written it, but he was talking about, I think the warehouse supervisor, Eddie, I can't remember his last name.
Yeah, so there was two. There was Ronnie Edens and Leonard Riddle.
Ronnie Edens, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ronnie Edens had said that because of the location by the Kentucky River and the fact that the fog rolls, it rolls off the river, comes into the warehouses sometimes, that he said that impacted the barrel. So is that something that you've heard? I mean, is that true? I mean, because if you drive by, there's always fog rolling off that river down there, right? So,
the answer to your question is Ronnie was a pretty cool dude. So I got a chance to be around Ronnie and Leonard and Elmer. Elmer's wife used to make me cookies when I was a kid. And what I learned when I would get around these guys was you just listen. I mean, I was like a big sponge sitting over in the corner, and I was amazed at the kinds of things like that they would come out with. And so I started to do research, and I was trying to figure out, well, what would a fog coming in from the river, how would that influence how whiskey was aging in the barrel? Well, remember, white oak has a special property called ptillosis. They're little bars that run crossways of the grain. Mm-hmm. Water molecules are smaller. So what happens is during this cooler period of time when fog is being created, the molecules inside the barrel are actually contracting because it is creating a vacuum. It's pulling inward. It's pulling the whiskey out of the wood back through the char. And now you've got this nice cool mist that's coming into that warehouse, and that mist is actually being absorbed by that wood. So that's how, like, periodically we will produce bourbon. The proof is actually lower 15 years later than it was when it went in the barrel at 125 proof. Now it's coming out at 119, 124. So there's obvious that moisture came from somewhere, isn't it?
Right. Yep.
So it's that gentle relationship. And that's what Ronnie was talking about. Was what he was saying was that mist, that fog is moisture. That's just water in a vapor form, which makes it easier for it to be absorbed as it goes into those warehouses, because the windows during the summertime are all open.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it was funny because I read that and I was like, I'm going to have to ask Freddie about that just to get his opinion on that. Well, guys, I can't believe we're almost at the end of round 3 here. This is kind of crazy. This round went really, really fast. And I hate that, but I don't want to wrap up before I ask you just a couple more questions real quick, Freddie. One thing I wanted to ask you is, what does the future look like for you and also for Buffalo Trace?
So someone asked the question, they were trying to figure out planning and the visitor's experience. And one of the questions that they asked me was, they said, well, Freddie, when do you plan on retiring? And I was like, well, damn, I never even thought about that. I'm having so much freaking fun. I hadn't really thought about, going away. And it reminded me of Elmer and my dad. And even though they said they retired, Elmer still came in on every friggin' Tuesday and selected his barrels of Elmer T. Lee, went through the Blanton Bottling Hall, went through the taste. It was like, if you really get into this, do you really ever retire? I mean, Jimmy Russell is over there. Eddie's running the distillery, but Jimmy comes over there and hangs out at Wild Turkey. So it's like, I thought about that. And then I joked with Mark Brown about it. And Mark Brown was like, he says, what do you mean retiring? He says, you're not getting off the hook that easy. He said, your father was around rolling these damn barrels he rolled out 1 million barrels every 10 years. That was like 60 years. And I'm like, no, Mark. I don't think I'm going to make 1 millionth barrels. And I said that as a joke. And then he says, but we're doubling the output of the distillery. He said, so we're going to be doing 1 million barrels roughly every 3 to 3.5 years. He said, so you can't let your dad down. He says, you've got to at least roll out 6 of these 1 million barrel. And I'm like, Mark. And I said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to physically walk around and do this. He says, not to worry, Freddie. He says, I've already ordered us a couple of those rascal scooters with the little long antennas and the raccoon tail on the top. He says, we're just going to go around the distillery on these scooters, and we'll still be here for another 10, 15 years. I'm not really sure. I will let Mother Nature and Father Time determine what I'm capable of doing. But I've got my grandson involved, my grandson Osiris. When my father passed away, we wanted to continue the legacy. So the last barrel that I rolled out with my dad was the 6 millionth barrel. For the 7 millionth barrel and the 8 millionth barrel, I got my grandson out of school, and Osiris helped me roll the 7 millionth and the 8 millionth, like I used to have my dad roll the barrels before. Wow. So I'm hoping that, I may not be there full time, but I'm hoping I'll be around there for a couple of more years and at least get a chance to roll out the 9th million. If the spirits are with me, maybe the 10th millionth. And by then I should be just about ready to sit down in one of those rocking chairs that they have and tell stories and sip beer and talk to you guys, but talk to you in a way that I don't have to get up and go anywhere. So that's
Yeah. That sounds great. So one last question. What's been the favorite part of this journey for you so far?
Sharing the experience of growth and the evolution of the product. Mark, on a serious note, if you think about it, the process of making good bourbon and making good whiskey has not changed. It's the same as it was in the 17 and 1800s. Now, even though we've introduced technologies and we've introduced ways that we think makes it age faster, and we've come up with, I was joking with you about the freeze-dried coffee concept of popping the little container into a little unit and poof, you got
Right.
a bourbon that tastes like a 12-year-old bourbon. And maybe you can. I don't question technology anymore. But I do know that when I sit down with someone with a good pour of bourbon that represents, let's say, 10, 12, 15 years of my life, I want to be able to reflect back 10, 12, 15 years and look at the time the product was made. What was I doing? What was going on in my life? And what are the things that have changed or happened during that period of time that product was sitting in a barrel maturing? And I am tasting the fruits of, let's say, an orchard or a vineyard that you planted as a child with your father. And now the fruits of those memories have now become a reality that you can share, and it brings back those moments of years ago that meant something to you, that made you the person that you are today. So if that makes any sense, that's what I see this whole thing is about. I'm not worried about making bourbon faster. I think the best bourbon is yet to be made, but I think the craft of making bourbon is an appreciation of what it took over the number of years to create the product that you're enjoying in a glass today.
That makes perfect sense to me and sounds absolutely beautiful. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I can't close it out any better than that.
Well,
Definitely. So Freddie, before we wrap it up here, I just want to say thanks, but do you have any final thoughts or anything else you want to add before we get out of here tonight?
no, I tell you what, I going into this, I wasn't really sure of how this was going to work. When Matt said, what would you like for your three pours to be? I thought about when you had the session with Harlan, and I said, I don't want to go down the same road that Harlan went down. I said, because that would be redundant, because you know how people go back and look at your previous podcasts and see what was said there, and then they compare that to another one. Harlan's background is entirely different from mine. Little did we know that we both came up from the mountainous area, and moonshining. Harlan claimed he was the first legal moonshiner in his family. And then I look at the different expressions that we continue to come out with. And I shared with Harlan the other day, we were doing a group event, and I said, we have a number of experimental barrels on premise right now. So there's over 1 million barrels of whiskey at Buffalo Trace right now, aging. But a large number of those barrels are experimental barrels. So Harlan today is doing what Elmer did. He's doing what Ronnie Edens did. He's doing what Leonard Riddle did. He's doing what Colonel Blanton did, what Dad and them did. He's making products today, experiments that some he will never live to taste during his lifetime when they finally hit the store and it's a product on the shelf in the store. So that's, to me, the cool part about what we're doing is, and the beauty of your podcast is, people are getting to have an archive of a journey that we in the industry are on that says, when you raise this glass of bourbon 10 years from now, reflect back on 10 years ago when we were sitting here and we were talking about this White Dog and the progression of some of these products that we were tasting here tonight. 10 years from now, that will be the OFC 25 and the Double Legal 20. You know what I mean? Same product. Those barrels are sitting in the house right now. So I hope for you and Matt, Mark, I hope that 10 years from now, you guys are still making podcasts and you have someone come back and revisit some of these products from Mashville 1 and the wheated product line and think about this moment that we shared together this evening. And I hope it brings you as much joy as you have brought to me by allowing me to be a part of this podcast this evening. So salute. Thank you.
Well, cheers. Thank you very much for that, Freddie. I'm telling you, 10 years from now, we're going to find you in your rocking chair and we're going to bring the equipment to you and we're going to do this all over again.
You got a deal, buddy.
So Matt, all right. That sounds great. Matt, before we wrap it up, man, anything you want to add?
I couldn't really put it much better than what Freddie was just saying. But Freddie, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and with our whole family of listeners here, share an evening with us and whatever time of day it is with them. We really appreciate your time. And this really has been quite an experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everything. Here's to many years to come. Thank you.
Yeah. We appreciate that very much, Freddie. And thank you, like Matt said, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. Appreciate who you are, what you do. Your passion is just so obvious. Your enthusiasm for what you do is incredible, and it's fun to be around you. You know, like the SBS event that we did, the live drawing. It was just great to see you up on stage. You engage with everybody. You're like America's favorite. Like, you're more than a tour guide. I mean, you're just like an ambassador for bourbon across the board. There's no other way to really say it. And people appreciate that and really enjoy getting to be around you. Mm-hmm. So thank you for spending some time with us tonight. Hopefully we'll get to spend some time in person at some point, have a few pours with you. I think that would be a lot of fun. But with that said, I do need to say we are the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by Old Dominick Distillery, and we appreciate them for their sponsorship. We appreciate all of our sponsors. And like Matt said, we appreciate you, our listeners, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are listening to us. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and listen to Freddie's stories and to listen to what we're doing here. We really enjoy what we do. We love being able to share these stories of these great people that are in the industry. Just have a lot of fun doing that. If you have any suggestions for the stories that we do, the podcast, the guests, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. We would love to have you join our private Facebook group, The Bourbon Lifers. We have a lot of fun, great conversations in there, so please check that out. With that said, though, I'm going to wrap it up, send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.